Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Office Blow Daz.
I'm Gaynor.
Here we are, two of us today. If Patreon's your thing, check out the link in the description below. Absolutely loads of stuff on there. Something every day on across the board on it,
Yep.
pretty much. Full watch-alongs, things like Modern Family, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, very funny.
Family.
Two very funny shows actually,
Yeah.
Modern Family and Always Sunny.
Yeah.
But we're well into them as well, so like fifth, sixth episodes, fifth, sixth season, something like that. So there's loads of stuff on there, plus loads of other stuff as well. Check it out. All starts just $3 a month. The tragedy of the deadliest airshow disaster ever. I love to see an airshow.
Yeah.
But it always goes through my mind that the dangers and they put themselves in first of all, but also the spectators, in and around the area.
Yeah.
I know they've changed a lot of the rules, especially in the UK,
Yeah.
on how the airshows work now.
We used to have the Red Devils, didn't we?
Still do the Red Arrows.
Red Arrows,
Yeah.
A fighter jet roars out of a barrel roll so close to the ground that it clips a tree branch with its wing. Thousands of excited spectators watch in disbelief. But inside the cockpit, the pilot screams. This isn't a stunt. What happened next became the deadliest airshow disaster in history. Just hours earlier, the mood at Lviv Airfield couldn't have been more different. To mark the 60th anniversary of the 14th Air Corps, the Ukrainian military organized a grand celebration. Flying the Sukhoi Su-27, a fighter jet capable of dazzling stunts like the Pugachev's Cobra, they are set to deliver a breathtaking display of national pride. But beneath the surface, cracks in the event's planning are already showing. Volodymyr Topanar, a seasoned pilot with 27 years of experience, had asked for practice flights at Lviv Airfield to get familiar with the layout. But the Air Force denied his request because it was too expensive. Since it was a military affair, Topanar didn't protest. This might sound dangerous to the general public, but not for a senior pilot in the Ukrainian Air Force. He was briefed on the area using military-grade intelligence and had performed...
You think if you perform in mega stunts in mega expensive aircraft,
with loads of
people waiting
and
watching, you'd have practice runs.
Yeah.
But several of them, not just you wouldn't just go into it cold. I know these guys are super trained and super experienced.
Yeah, but it's like you said, it's an airfield he'd not
familiar with. Yeah. You think the first thing you do, we're not familiar with that airfield, we need to do a run. We need to do a run.
Yeah.
Not like, can we?
Yeah.
Performed his planned routine countless times. For a pilot like him, unfamiliar territory isn't exactly unusual. After all, you don't get practice runs in a war zone.
Correct.
Things only got worse. On the day, organizers switched the show's location from one side of the airfield to the other at the last minute. This includes moving the spectator zones. These changes are rushed and chaotic, and neither Topanar nor his co-pilot, Yuri Yegorov, have been told about them. Even with his adaptability, Topanar feels uneasy. In the days leading up, local pilots familiar with the site had raised concerns, describing the event's organization as chaotic at best. One even pulled out of the show altogether, citing poor preparation. It's becoming clear that the show is suffering from a shockingly poor standard of organization and planning. But despite these problems, Topanar pushes forward, focusing on the show's finale, a complex routine of loops, rolls, and a daring low pass over the crowd. It has been a successful show to this point. The pilots approach Lviv Airfield to begin their routine, but as they enter the airfield, radio responses make it clear that the site's layout doesn't meet their expectation. With over 8,000 people on the ground, including senior military officials, you'd think they'd be hard to miss. But from the cockpit, Topanar and Yegorov can't see the crowd at all. A potentially deadly situation for those below. When Topanar finally spots the audience, they're not where he expected. They're on the opposite side of the plane. To make matters worse, the flight parameters provided by the Air Force don't match the actual terrain on the ground. Under pressure to complete the routine, the pilots contact air traffic control for guidance. Ignoring the apparent confusion, controllers tell the pair to continue executing maneuvers. And military pilots are taught to follow orders, which they do despite blatant safety violations. Topanar and Yegorov faultlessly perform their routine for several minutes, but they soon run into trouble when they attempt to execute a standard aerobatic move. During a half-barrel roll, Topanar notices that both engines have decreased thrust, which causes their airspeed to fall. Flying slower than usual, the pair descends to 200 meters above ground level before immediately pulling up to enter a loop with a turn. The move is supposed to run parallel to the spectators. However, given the mismatched layout compared to their flight plans, they are flying head-on towards a large group of people instead.
Imagine being at an air show and seeing a plane flying at you. I mean, I know they're supposed to get kind of like close enough to you where you appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I think it's no good having an air show and having them 100 miles away and seeing them from a distance. But you got to get up close and personal.
That is close, that.
But that's, yeah. Can you imagine? You shit yourself, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Plane exits
No.
the loop. It continues descending at high speed. Topanar fights to gain control of the jet, but it's getting too close to the ground. With the plane beginning to level out, it looks like the pilots might avoid catastrophe. But as they approach the tree line in front of spectators, it's clear they are too low to regain altitude in time. The jet's left wing strikes a tree branch and veers toward the ground. Amazingly, the wingtip touches the concrete, and the plane briefly levels out, flying inches above the ground. But the situation is beyond saving. Topanar cannot pull up, and the jet rushes past bystanders towards a parked transport plane. With nothing they can do, Yegorov pulls the ejector toggle just before their jet collides with a parked aircraft. With this final act, disaster strikes. On impact, their jet cartwheels into the air. After several rotations, it slams into the ground and explodes, hurtling into onlookers at high speed. As if this wasn't bad enough, the debris manages to catch and drag a barbed wire section along the asphalt, casting a morbid net of destruction. While some try to escape the carnage, others are frozen while they watch as scorching jet fuel, shrapnel, and barbed wire fencing rip through a crowd consisting of many local families. When the wreckage finally comes to a stop, the immediate aftermath is shocking. So much so that some bystanders still struggle with the mental effects of what they saw. People cry out for relatives they'll never see again, and others simply walk away, unable to bear the sight of dismembered loved ones. In some cases, the deceased are beyond recognition. In the crowd, a veteran pilot watches the plane as it crashes. He arrived at the show with his wife and 3 children, but tragically left the show with only 2 surviving sons.
My first thought was my wife and son. The runway was full of human remains. It was hell.
Topanar and Yegorov escape unharmed, landing several hundred feet from the wreckage. The ejector seats save their lives. It's impossible to imagine the thoughts going through their minds as emergency services try to deal with the chaos unfolding before them. Over the following weeks, details slowly emerged about the cause of the accident. There was national outrage over the loss of life, and the Ukrainian president promised repercussions for both the senior and little men responsible in the Ukrainian military. It's not like the dangers of an air show weren't well known. By 2002, after several tragedies had led to well-defined safety guides, planes were never supposed to fly directly over crowds or approach them head-on. Spectators needed to be placed far from danger, and display areas required clear escape routes for aircraft in case of emergencies. On top of that, pilots were expected to maintain strict flight distances and only attempt maneuvers they could safely execute. But at the Sknyliv Air Show, it was clear from the start that these precautions were being ignored. Planes flew over the crowd repeatedly, and spectators had been gathered on both sides of the runway, leaving no safe margin for error and no clear escape path for a plane in distress. It was a disaster waiting to happen. When the dust settled, the head of the Air Force was dismissed and blame fell squarely on the pilots. Topanar, in particular, became the scapegoat, accused of breaching flight rules and attempting a dangerous maneuver at low altitude. But the full picture of what happened and why was far more complicated. Topanar wasn't some rookie pilot making careless mistakes. With 27 years of experience, he had performed every maneuver in that day's routine many times before without incident. Allegedly, evidence even showed he performed them correctly during the flight. Yet this was disregarded at his trial. The 3 judges overseeing it, as employees of the Ministry of Defense, were closely tied to the institution under scrutiny. So, what went wrong? 3 key factors stood out. First, the information provided to the pilots was incorrect. Topinar was given the wrong crowd placement and aerodrome layout, leaving him unsure of where spectators were positioned. He repeatedly radioed air traffic control for confirmation, but was told to carry on flying. This miscommunication significantly increased danger to the people below. Second, the Su-27 fighter jet he was flying lost power mid-flight. Investigators acknowledged this, but little effort was made to uncover why the plane suffered such a critical failure. The truth remains unknown. What we do know is that the aircraft itself was a problem. By 2002, Ukraine's military fleet was composed largely of aging Soviet-era leftovers, and only 15% of the 700 planes were considered fit for operation. The Su-27 flown at Sknyliv had undergone faulty maintenance, and its engine RPM was reportedly lower than it should have been at the time of the crash. Topinar later argued that he reported these issues mid-flight, but was ordered by ground control to continue the routine.
Wow.
The plane, he claimed, eventually became uncontrollable. And while more problems with the jet may have existed, the military investigation was unlikely to uncover or admit to them. Finally, the event itself was poorly planned from the start. There were no proper safety margins, and the crowd had been placed dangerously close to the action. These issues were evident to the experienced pilots in attendance, some of whom even refused to fly in the show. Yet, the priority for the organizers and controllers was to keep the event going, regardless of the risks. Despite these overwhelming systemic failures, the inquiry focused narrowly on Topinar. He was blamed for breaching regulations, even though the unsafe conditions weren't of his making. At his trial, prosecutors ignored evidence of his correct maneuvers and instead painted him as reckless.
Wow.
That said, Topinar's decisions weren't without fault. Moments before the crash, he acknowledged the jet had an engine problem and lacked the airspeed necessary for its next maneuver. Yet, he still attempted a high-risk stunt at low altitude, a decision that ultimately sealed the fate of the Su-27 and the people on the ground. The result of this final poor decision was the deaths of 77 people and a further 543 injuries. Children were made orphans, and parents left on the airfield childless. Although the president and the public had their figures to blame, the state's handling of the accident wasn't without its criticism. To begin with, the victims of the crash received questionable support. The state only allocated the equivalent of $200,000 to be shared between the families of the deceased. According to recipients, each family's share appeared utterly random, with payments ranging from $7,000 to $40,000 for no apparent reason. Even less money was allocated to the injured, who received extremely low payments to help with medical care. In one of the worst examples, a 4-year-old child was found lying on deceased bodies at the airfield. The trauma of the disaster affected his speech and impeded his mental development, yet his family was only compensated the equivalent of $2,000 by the Ukrainian government. Thankfully, no airshow accidents have even come close to the casualty toll at Sknyliv, but it's doubtful that true justice was served.
No.
Topinar was sentenced to 14 years in prison,
Wow.
whereas Yegorov received an 8-year jail term. It also found 3 other officials guilty of failing to follow orders, negligence, and violating flight rules. All 3 were jailed for between 4 and 6 years. The pressure to continue the show would have come from senior officials in the military. It's also doubtful that only 3 officials were involved in negligence in the build-up to and during the show. No official information regarding the display line and its separation from the crowd has been released. Equally, the investigation results and final report remain unpublished. Topinar is the only person who served the entirety of his jail term. He has to report to authorities once a month, is working to pay off millions in fines, and commutes to work on rollerblades as he's banned from driving vehicles, including bicycles. By comparison, Yegorov and 2 senior officials were released early. Another only received a suspended jail sentence and still works in the Air Force today. Watch this episode next.
Wow, that's crazy.
That is crazy, isn't it?
When was that story? Because it's I don't know when that video came out. I'm just going
I
to
think
have a quick look.
was it 2002?
It's recent, 2024, but that's 2002, the disaster.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if these have been recalled to fight in the military now. Now they're in war.
Right.
No, they've been pulled and sort of like saying you're going back in to go through it. I guess it's negligence of the pilot.
Yeah.
He knows there's something wrong with the aircraft.
Yeah.
Yet he's still performing manoeuvres, whether it be even if you got orders to do it.
Yeah.
You still sort of say, I'm risking stuff here.
Yeah.
It's not something we can do.
Yeah. It's not like they're at war.
Land the plane and then argue about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But it's like, I can understand it when you're given, what do you call it?
Orders.
Yeah, when during war, you can't say, "Oh, I'm not going to do that." But not in an air show.
Yeah, an air show is just like it's there to entertain at the end of the day. But if you're taking it down, you're crashing the plane and you're killing people.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing. But it's probably just negligence on the pilot's behalf as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Even regardless of his orders, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
He knows he's flying a faulty aircraft.
And he knew what was, there was something not right.
Mad though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Very sad.
Well. Yeah. Anyway, decent video to explain it all. Yeah, very good. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.
Bye.
Cheers.